Hello everyone, welcome once again to this class on Old Testament Survey or Bible Survey 1. So let's move ahead. Let's move to the next chapter, that is lesson number 9. And in this lesson, we will be dealing with the book of Leviticus and the book of Deuteronomy. So let's begin. Let me start sharing the screen with you. Okay. Yeah, so this is lesson number 9, and just now I told you that we are going to talk about the book of Leviticus and the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, so first we'll talk about the book of Leviticus. Okay, so the book of Leviticus, the book of Leviticus is actually a rule book. It is a book of laws, full of laws. Okay, it's a rule book. Okay, so it is in rules and regulations and laws given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. Okay, so all these laws that are given in the book of Leviticus, basically Moses received all these laws in on Mount Sinai for the people of Israel. Okay, so the name of the book basically comes from the Greek adjective form. Okay, the Greek adjective form, which is Levi, that is Leutikon. Okay, Leutikon. Okay, so this is a derivation from the name Levi. Okay, derivation from the name Levi, and it is Leutikon. This is an adjective of Levi, and it is Leutikon. So the priestly tribe. This is a priestly tribe of Israel. We all know that Levites were chosen to be the priests of the Israelites. Okay, so it is named because of the Levitical priesthood, that is Aaron and his descendants. Okay, because they administered at the temple. Okay, they administered at the temple and they administered the laws. Yet we have to understand that these laws are not only for the Levi. These laws were not only for the priestly class. These laws were not only for the priests, but it is for the whole of Israel, for the whole people. Okay, so though the name is Levi or Leutikon or something like that, it does not mean that this book was only for the priests, but these priests were the people who used to keep the books of these laws. Okay, so and they used to administer these laws to the people. Okay, so that is why probably the name has been given. So in Hebrew, the book is called Vaikra. Okay, the Hebrew name is Vaikra, and this is basically the first few words of the book of Leviticus, and it simply means and he or God called, and he called, and he or God called. So this is Vaikra. Okay, so the book may seem strange for the present readers. We can understand because it talks about a lot of sacrifices. It talks about a lot of bloodshed. Okay, where animals are being killed and they are being sacrificed. But we have to understand that these sacrifices actually reflect the mercy of God. It talks about the substitutional death of animals. So we have to understand that God never wanted humankind to suffer. God never wanted humankind to die a death like this. Okay, so we can understand that this is the grace and the mercy, basically the mercy and the kindness of God that is reflected in this book of Leviticus. Okay, so we can see that God's mercy is abundant in the book of Leviticus because it talks about sacrificial system. It talks about animals being sacrificed for human sin. Okay, and actually this is a type, or this is a sign, or this is a pointer towards the perfect sacrifice that is in the New Testament, that is Jesus Christ. Okay, so here we see that some blameless animal had to be brought as a substitute, was sacrificed and burnt at the altar, so that man's sin should be forgiven, so that the guilty may be considered righteous. Okay, so when the person sacrificed this animal on the altar, God God chose actually to not to see his sin. God hid the sin of mankind, and God chose not to see. Okay, God chose not to see the sinfulness or sin of that man. So God, through that sacrifice, God called that person not guilty or righteous. Okay, so the blame would go upon the animal, the blame would go upon that perfect animal, and he would be sacrificed. In the same way, we see in the New Testament, Jesus took upon himself all our blame and all our guilt and all our sinfulness and all our curses, and he died on the cross. So this is actually a symbolic thing that we see that was fulfilled in the New Testament through Jesus Christ. Okay, so it points towards a perfect sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross, and without this book actually we cannot understand why Jesus had to die in this manner, or why Jesus had to sacrifice himself, or we would not understand the meaning of crucifixion at all if we do not have the idea of this book of Leviticus or the sacrificial system that we have. Okay, so it also emphasizes on the theological truth that the holy God, that God is holy. The holy God demands holiness from his people. Okay, Leviticus chapter 11, verse 44. I am holy, so he calls, God is holy, so he asks his people also to be holy. Okay, so at that time when there is moral unholiness, that is, the nation of Israel is surrounded by nations that are completely unholy, where the gods and goddesses do not have an iota of holiness, do not have righteousness at all. They do not, talk about righteousness, but there is so much of immorality, unethicality, there's so much injustice. We see that God is talking about himself being holy, and he wants his people to be holy. Okay, so that's how we see this book. This book basically talks about holiness of God, and that his desire that his people should also be holy. And so he finds a way that his people should be holy, and he gives this provision of sacrifice so that his people can be called righteous. Okay, and they can also model it to the other people. So the law in the book shows us how beautifully God harmonized his natural laws for the good of his people. So he basically he took all these laws and he gave these people so that it could just be good for the people, and they, by following that, they may be able to be righteous and holy before him. Okay, so let's look at this at some important themes of this book. The first important theme definitely is the offerings. Okay, the first important theme is the sacrifice and the offering. Okay, so let's look at the 5 different kinds of offerings or sacrifices that were done in those times. It's in the book of Leviticus. So the first one is the burnt offering. Second is the cereal or the grain offering. Third is the peace of fellowship offering. Fourth is a sin offering. Fifth is the guilt or the repayment offering. So we have to understand that among all of this, only one offering did not have bloodshed, that was a cereal or the grain offering. The rest, everything had bloodshed or the animal sacrifice. Okay, so the next, this was the first theme, that is offerings and sacrifices. Okay, so the next theme that we see over here is Jubilee year. This Jubilee year is very important, very, very important for an Israelite. Okay, so they would be actually waiting for this Jubilee year, and they were so much, this Jubilee ordinances were so much important for these people group. Okay, so let's see what this Jubilee year or Jubilee ordinances were all about. Okay, so there is a Sabbath. We have to understand there were Sabbaths that they celebrated. Okay, so seventh day was a Sabbath. Okay, seventh week was a sabbatical week. Okay, and then there was a sabbatical month, and there is a sabbatical year. Okay, so every seven has importance. So seventh day, seventh week, seventh month, seventh year. So everything has a definite importance or significance. Okay, so there is a sabbatical year. Let's talk about sabbatical year first. So sabbatical year is mentioned in chapter 25, verses 1 to 7. So this is the seventh year. It's always a seventh year. Okay, seventh year is called the sabbatical year. So what happens on the sabbatical year? Sabbatical year means is the year of rest for the land. Okay, so on the seventh year, people are not supposed to work on the land. Okay, for the whole seventh year, people are not supposed to work on the land. Okay, they are just supposed to eat what the land naturally produces. Okay, so for the first 6 years, they are supposed to work and they are supposed to grow crops and harvest the crops. But on the seventh year, they are not supposed to touch the land. They are supposed to allow the land to take rest, and whatever the land produces on its own, they can use that, and it was abundant, and they can use that and they can survive on that. Okay, and we have to understand that ecologically also it is very important to give rest to the land so that it can recover from the wear and tear. Okay, and this actually, the sabbatical year actually, it exerted the true ownership of the land to God. It actually showed that the land does not belong to me, the land belongs to God. Okay, because this is seventh year, we offer this land to God, and everything that the land produces on its own, we will eat. Okay, so it asserts definitely that the God is the true owner of this land. Okay, so this is a sabbatical year. Okay, now let us look at the Jubilee. What is a Jubilee? Chapter 28 verse 25 verse 8 to 12. Okay, it is mentioned, it talks about the jubilee year, the jubilee ordinances. So there are 7 sabbatical years. After the 7th sabbatical year, that is the 49th year, there is the 50th year. Okay, so 7 sevens are 49. So there are 7 sabbatical years, and immediately after the 7th sabbatical year is the year of jubilee. Okay, so what happens on this day? So we have to understand that the day of atonement, on the day of atonement, that is the day of atonement comes every year. Okay, every year there's a day of atonement where two rams are brought and two bulls or rams are brought, and the whole societies or the whole communities sins are put upon him, put upon that animal, and he's sacrificed. And one is sent to the desert, saying that God has, removed the sin from them. That's how it is. So every year has a day of atonement. So from the day of on the day of atonement, on the 49th year, they will blow a trumpet. Okay, they start blowing the trumpet and they will announce the beginning of the sabbatical, the jubilee year. Sorry, they are going to talk about. They are going to announce the advent of the jubilee year. Okay, so it becomes like that, and it is a huge festival that takes place. Okay, so this jubilee is derived from the Hebrew word yobel. Okay, yobel means ram or ram's horn. So they blow ram's horn. Trumpet means they are blowing ram's horn at that time. So the day of atonement, they blow ram's horn, and they announce the coming or the advent of the jubilee year. Now, what is happening on this jubilee year? Let's see what is happening on this jubilee year. Firstly, this was a time of huge celebration. This was the time of great celebration and rest. Okay, so the land would receive rest. This year again, the land would receive rest. So you have to understand that 2 years, continuous 2 years, when the Jubilee year is coming, there is continuous 2 years of rest for the land. That is 49th year, which is the sabbatical year, and then this is Jubilee year, which is the 50th year. Both of the years, the land will be resting, and there is not supposed to be any kind of cultivation. Only the third year they are supposed to cultivate. Okay, so these 2 years they are not supposed to cultivate. The Jubilee year, they are supposed to give rest to the land. Okay, rest to the land. So rest becomes an important aspect on in the Jubilee year. So whatever grows naturally, they're supposed to eat from that. Okay. Secondly, it is a time for return. What return? Okay, we have to understand what is to be returned. So each man returned to his own homes. Okay, each man returned to his own properties. Uh, then each person who gets back his own property. Okay, if he has sold some property, so you have to understand what is happening in this jubilee year. First is rest for the land. Second is return. What is returning? So we have to understand there are times when this is called the consequent legislation on property. This is known as the consequent legislation of the on the property. So it simply states that the land should be reverted to the original owner. Okay, so in this jubilee year, the land is reverted or returned to the original owner. So there were times when some families would go through hard times. Okay, they would go to some rough times. That means maybe there's some financial crisis, or there may be crop failure, or there may be some different kind of crisis that or shortages that a family might face, and because of that they might be forced to sell their land, sell their houses, or put it on loan or something like that, and all those things would happen. Okay, so because of that, then they would get loan for that, and because of that, some many times that there many times the rich would become richer and the poor would become poorer, because many times the people who take the land and keep the land and give loan, basically they make fortune out of it, and someone else is at a loss. So all these things would happen naturally. Okay, so there is a law that God gave to the Israelites so that this should not happen, so that equality should be maintained. The law showed that the Lord is a protector of the dispossessed. So the land was God's. Okay, so in the Old Testament we have to understand that God simply says the land belongs to me. I gave it to you. The land belongs to me. Okay, and He has allocated the land according to His will and purpose. So originally the land belongs to God. Okay, and He has given it to the people. So there always is a right of redemption of the land. Okay, so first thing that we see in the Jubilee year is that if anyone has sold the land, if anyone has given it for loan or something like that, it is returned to the original owner. So the land is returned to the original owner on the in the jubilee year. So nobody can keep somebody's land forever. In the jubilee year, they have to return the land or property to the people or original owners of the land and property. That was the ordinance of the jubilee year. Okay, so this is an automatic reversion. Okay, this is an automatic reversion in the land in the jubilee year. That is automatically the land will be returned to the original owner. Okay, and he may start working on that land once again. Okay, so he will stand equal grounds again, and he will get another chance to own or to earn his living. Okay, the second thing that we can see over here is the relative or goel or the kinsman redeemer. Okay, here when automatic reversion is not taking place or before the automatic reversion also, a kinsman redeemer can purchase the land or property and give it back to the original owner. Okay, so we have to understand what is happening over here. Okay, if you have read the story of Ruth, this is something that was happening over there also. So if suppose you as an individual has lost a property because of financial crisis, so he had to sell his property off to somebody. Okay, so now he is landless, now he has is property less, he does not have any property and he's living a very low life. So what he can do is he can approach to a kinsman or he can approach to a near relative. Okay, so he can ask relative to purchase the land for him. So this kinsman redeemer would kinsman or kinsman from the same kin would go to that person and purchase the land back. Okay, purchase the land back, and he may give it to the original person. Okay, so that is how this is known as kinsman redeemer. So he would the kinsman would redeem the property. Okay, and this can happen anytime. This can happen any time of the year. You do not have to wait for the jubilee year. Okay, so this can be done any time of the any part of the year. Okay, so the kinsman can redeem the property or land or anything of a kinsman. So that is this is not the automatic, but this is something that a kinsman can do. So if the property has not been redeemed already by the original owner, a house in a walled city could be bought back by the right of redemption, which is lasted only for a year. Okay, so if it has not been redeemed, then it can be kept only for 1 year, and then after that it should be redeemed. Okay, if the unredeemed house remained with the buyer in perpetuity, the advent of the jubilee year did not affect it. Yeah, that means that if the house remains unredeemed with the buyer and there is no provision made after that, then the jubilee year also will not make any difference in the walled cities. Okay, so the jubilee laws were basically for the agricultural laws. Okay, so we have to understand that this laws did not apply to the cities or the urban area, but this applied only to the agricultural land system. Okay, not for the urban system. So we have to understand that the same rules apply to the unwalled cities or villages. Okay, unwalled and open land and agricultural, they all had the same laws, but the city or walled cities or the urban cities, they had different laws. Okay, so this was basically for the rural areas, for the unwalled cities, for the unwalled lands. Okay, so this rule of automatic reversion and all. So the houses in the Levitical towns were different. Okay, they had different rules. So their property was always redeemable. Okay, so the houses in the Levitical land were always redeemable. Okay, so thirdly, we can see first we saw rest, second we saw return. Now third we see release. So what is release? So the rest was for the land, return was for the property, and we see release. Now release is for the slaves. Okay, for the people who have been bonded as laborers or who have been pledged as slaves, who have been pledged as servants. So they have, because of some financial crisis, you had to give your house member to some kind of slavery, to some kind of servant, to some kind of service, okay, to another people. So they were pledged for some kind of service. So on this year they were all set free and they were released, so they could go back and they were free. Okay, so through this we can see that God shows his care for the impoverished and for the enslaved. Okay, so we see this is especially beneficial for those who have fallen into hard times and could not deal with it, or could not fight with it, and they fell to it and they had to get into slavery or get into some kind of service. Okay, but there were some rules in the slavery system also. An Israelite can never keep an Israelite as a slave. Okay, they can keep as helper, they can ask them to serve, but they can never keep them as slave. An Israelite living in an alien or temporary resident as a temporary resident would benefit with this special provision because he can come back. Okay, charging interest on fellow Israelites was not allowed in the Old Testament, but they could charge interest from the foreigners. Okay, no Israelites were supposed to keep Israelite slaves. Okay, one may ask for services or sell their services, but no Israelite is supposed to keep another Israelite as slave. Okay, so the period of slavery must also end in Jubilee. So with Jubilee, the period of service or slavery will end, and that person is free after that. Okay, but if it is a non-Israelite, if it's an alien, if it's a non-Israelite, they can be acquired as an hereditary. Okay, they can be acquired for a lifetime, they can be kept as slaves for a lifetime, and it is inheritable, and you can pass on that slave or servant to your children also. So the Jubilee regulations will not affect a foreigner or an alien who has become a slave or servant. Okay, so if an Israelite is a servant to an alien, he can be redeemed by the kinsman also. Okay, so the kinsman redeemer's role is very important. The kinsman is very, very important in an Israelite culture because he can redeem your property, he can redeem your house people or house members, and he can redeem people also. So he is a very important person. So we see that three things happen in a Jubilee year. First is rest for the land. Second is return to your own property. And third is release of all the slaves who were under bondage or any kind of pledged service. Okay, so all these laws basically symbolize a new age salvation. Whether or not, we do not know whether or not these laws were completely or fully obeyed or practiced in those times, we have no idea, but this was how God had ordained, this was how God had instituted the laws in the society. Okay, so let's move on and let's move to the outline of the book of Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 1 to chapter 7, we see instructions for offering. Chapter 10 to chapter 10, chapter 8 to chapter 10, it is initiation and consecration of the priesthood. Chapter 11 to 15, we see clean and unclean things distinguished. Chapter 16, the Day of Atonement. Chapter 17 to 25, social ceremonial prescriptions. Chapter 26, covenantal blessings and curses. And chapter 27, instructions concerning vows and offerings. Now let's move to the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, so this book is this is a record book of Moses. Okay, so you can take this as a record book of Moses. It's a farewell address, it's a farewell speech of Moses to the Israelites. So he's going to die, he's going to be taken away. So he's on Mount Moab. There on the plain of Moab. Okay, they're on the plain of Moab, and everybody is gathered, and it's around 1260 BC, and it's in the evening. Basically, this whole atmosphere is created over there, and they're about to enter the promised land. Okay, but Moses is not supposed to enter the promised land. So what he is doing, he is going to reiterate, he's going to repeat all the promises, he's going to repeat all the laws basically to the people. Okay, he's going to remind them and repeat all the laws to the people. So it is entitled as Deuteronomos. Okay, Deuteronomos, that means second law, which is actually quite misleading. Okay, because it is not the second law. If you use the term, or the if you know the meaning of Deuteronomos as second law, you will feel, or you will understand it as Moses is giving the second law, or second kind of law, second list of law. But this is not what he is doing. He's just restating. Okay, he's just restating all the laws that were received on Mount Sinai. So this is not the second law. It is only the repetition of all the laws. So it is in Hebrew, it is called Devrim. Okay. In Hebrew language, the title is Devarim, that is the words of Moses, and probably this is more apt. Okay, the words of Moses. So Moses is actually giving his last words to the people on the evening of entering the promised land, and after that, he is going to just pass away. Okay, so it follows a specific treaty plan. So we can see the way he has structured it, the way he speaks, the way he has structured it, it is following a Hittite treaty plan. Okay, this format is followed by Hittite treaty plan. So it talks about introduction, then there is historical prologue. Okay, when he talks about the past, and there are stipulations, and then there are curses and blessings, and then we have succession arrangements and public reading. Okay, so this is all found in the book of Deuteronomy, and in this structure only. So we see that he's following a particular pattern of writing. So we see here the laws recorded in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers are brought all together, and they are applied specifically to the settled life in Canaan. Okay, so we can see that Moses is actually reiterating, or he's restating all the laws and everything that happened in the book of Exodus, that the laws of Leviticus and the incidences of Numbers. So he's all gathering it all together, and he is putting it into his last speech and making it applicable for the people to follow it when they live in the land of Canaan. Okay. So some scholars believe that it was a copy of this book, that is Deuteronomy, that was discovered in the temple at the time of King Josiah. That is why he tears his clothes, as they have not followed its teachings. Okay, so if you, I don't know if you all know this part or not, but in the book of Kings, we can see that in the time of King Josiah, he was a young guy, he was a young king, and in his time, the priests found a copy of Deuteronomy, okay, copy of a scroll of Deuteronomy in the temple while cleaning the temple, and it contained some commandments. And when Josiah read all those commandments, he was heart struck and he was in tears, and he tore his robe because he felt that people are not following, they are not following the commands of the Lord. Okay, and after that we see a revelation, a complete change takes place. Okay, complete change takes place in the kingdom, and they turn towards God. Okay, complete change takes place over there. Okay, so that is what happened. So this is what Deuteronomy, even in the JDP theory, this is D is that Deuteronomy. Okay, so let's towards the end, let's look at the outline of the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 1, verse 1 to 5. There is a preamble. Then we have chapter 1, verse 6 to chapter 3, verse 29. That is historical prologue. Then we have chapter 4, verse 1 to chapter 26, verse 19, covenant stipulations. We have chapter 27, verse 1 to chapter 30, verse 20, blessings and curses, which is a very important portion. Then we have chapter 31, verse 1 to chapter 31, verse 52, talks about witness in reading of the text. And then lastly, we have chapter 33, verse 1 to chapter 34, verses 12. 34, verse 12. This talks about the final blessings of Moses. Okay, so this is all we have in the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. This was a survey once again, and we'll meet again with the next books. And we have ended the portion of Pentateuch. We'll be starting with the historical books, with the book of Joshua and Judges in the next class. Okay, praise the Lord. Thank you, everyone. God bless you all.